thank you for everyone that stayed. So this is the final panel. I don't want to introduce them as the exceptions to the rule. So for those of you who, like me, as I said, sadly read, and Sarah, who obviously knows things like that, Arts Council diversity data, the last report, which is June 2022, it really still shows the reluctance of sectors to embrace diversity across ethnicity, gender identity, sexuality and disability. And there still is quite a marked disparity between the sector and who the sector kind of purports to represent. In terms of national portfolio organisations at the moment, in terms of workforce nationally, this is not, I'm glad you're all sitting down because it's not a huge surprise. 51% is white and 14% is ethnically diverse. In terms of permanent staff, which is one of the major issues, especially around ethnic diversity, this is a huge shock. 72% of permanent staff in arts organisations that are funded through the Arts Council are white. This actually was quite shocking, and 10% is ethnically diverse. Because I've reported it. But actually, if you look at what the population of the country is, it in no way kind of reflects that. And senior management, exactly the same, 77% white, 9% ethnically diverse. In terms of disability, 8% of permanent staff are disabled. In terms of management, 9%. And as regards sexuality, 71% of the workforce is heterosexual or straight. So a little bit more trade. It's marginally better than before, but it's still quite glacial in terms of representation. So what does good practice look like in terms of diverse and inclusive leadership in the cultural sector? And we do actually have some of the exceptions to the rule, because to help answer this, we have our fabulous three panellists. Got Dr. Karen Patel, who is Research Fellow and Director of CEDIA, Alan McLean, who is Co-Artistic Director of Deaf Explorer, and Chris Sidworth, Director of Artistic Programming at Birmingham Hippodrome. So I've asked all of them to have a think about and reflect on their own kind of experiences. What does good practice in diverse, inclusive leadership look like? So I'm going to start with you, Alan.
Thank you, everybody. I find it really difficult to talk about best practice without talking a little bit about the deaf world and where we operate with. It's obviously hearing, neurodivergent, tinnitus, hearing injury, really make up being deaf, really. So, but in essence, we need to sort of like just talk about that. So, I mean, our good practice comes out of working in relationships with that deaf world, and I think it's because we understand the reason why government want inclusion and diversity, and that's because we know deaf people are continually excluded and left out. This is why the deaf community has established strong networks and self-organising skills. The deaf community do this so that they can have power and control over what it is they do. Deaf people make the decisions, and the quality and relevance in the deaf community of the work they make is high. Trust in the organisations that are funded by government is low, especially in the arts, because deaf culture is central to the identity and community, and it is not funded, or on rare occasions it is, like Deaf Festival in Hampton. And it's also kind of the sense that it's not recognised. Also, deaf people identify as a linguistic minority, not as a disability. It is also a diaspora with groups around the country, with larger groups and populations in the East and West Midlands, Doncaster, Cambridge, Sunderland, Newcastle, Bournemouth, and Liverpool. And we do work in those locations. So why are we here, Deaf Explorers here? It's to reveal the as yet unheard world of deaf artists. And we transform the autonomy and destiny of deaf artists, and we try and build radical approaches and create opportunities to produce a contemporary deaf culture. So I think the other thing that's really important as well is that we're a social enterprise. So we look at generating funding and money and income. And that's from a range of sources from access to work. And I say that because that enables us then to make choices about how we spend the funds that we have. And we have some amount of freedom in that around using it to support artists. So we produce artists and deaf artists' work, that's what we do, and within that statement is our best practice. because we actively work with challenges and barriers that stop deaf artists progressing in the arts. Barriers multiply when combined with protected characteristics of race, age, disability, gender reassignment, sexual preference, religion, or belief. And our ethos and how we work is that deaf artists are not just one homogenous deaf culture, which a lot of our colleagues perceive as white. They always interact and intersect with other kinds of cultural identity, making our practice focused on inclusion, as we talk about all the time. And evidence of that is that we recently consulted with neurodivergent artists who collaborated with deaf dancer Billy Reid on his Creative City grant. And we were actually quite pleasantly surprised, really, because Deaf Explorer produced the activity, and we discovered that our best practice as producers also supported neurodivergent artists and dancers, because we treated them as professionals. We had respect for their dance practice and the excellence in their work. And overall, they told us that we understand how they operate as neurodivergent artists. So what is it that Deaf Explorer do? What's that detail? So we are translators. We're hands-on, literally, using sign language to direct support and inform deaf artists in their first language, BSL. We know we must develop deaf artists' work over time. We have been working regularly with Rinko Barpega, Billy Reid and Ruth Montgomery since 2016. And it is only this year that Rinko achieved his ambition of performing at the Edinburgh Fringe. Pleasance Theatre Trust showed courage. I think there's this word mentioned earlier about courage, bravery. I think there needs courage and bravery in decision making to take the risk. That's what Pleasance did. It applied for a Black and global majority commission. And, you know, we were unsure, oh gosh, are they going to go, oh, it's deaf, it's split to Black, I know it's different, you know. And they went for it, and they bought it, and it's a fantastic relationship that we had with Pleasance. And Rinku delivered, got 2 awards, got 4-star reviews, and the response from reviewers has been incredibly positive. And he also won from my idea to being in a co-creation. And there's Morales worked with an amazing potter who I can't remember the name of, and he's expertise in China. Chris White. So Chris White is an amazing example whereby co-creation, you know, to a T, and then he wants to change his practice and working with morale. And I think that accuracy is kind of what is our best practice. That accuracy of how is it an artist with no experience of deafness, but kind of has a sort of a will to do it, and I hope that will is, what's the word, ethical, you know, then it can be magical and really important and progress the arts for everybody. So good R&Ds can also make up for the absence of degree education or experience of professional work. For example, with Rinku, it was clear that from Tyrone Huggins that he hadn't actually done an R&D process and taken a show on the road afterwards. And we all know why that is. You know, Rinku's 40, he's been making work for 25 years, you know, but he has not gone through that process. So these are the barriers that we're actively removing, and we need organisations to help us do that. So Deaf Explorer produce R&Ds, and we find the more involvement Deaf Explorer has in the artist activity, the better the project is in terms of sector impact. And we do find that the DYCPs that we're involved in do need very, very little impact. And I don't know if that's because we had COVID in the middle of it, but there's only really Morale's project that's really kind of like excelled out of that. So just to put that there, the R&D process of the grant scheme really works for Deaf Explorer and really works for the artists in terms of moving them into the sector. So finally, I guess, yeah, before COVID, we had 4 production grants. You know, so we've been R&Ding artists, we were raring to go. Some people think it's thankful it happened, because people are just drowned. But we did have some amazing things, like Mark Smith working at Bletchley Park, doing a co-creation with young people in schools with a maths, music and movement project. these things with, money from the museum, Arts Council Online, working with Multi-Teams Festival, all the aims were just falling into place, to demonstrate why you need an organisation like Deaf Explorer, even though you argue the deaf community is self-sufficient. So finally, we have an open door, and we will troubleshoot and problem solve for artists on issues outside of the project. And I think that's generosity that we have, but it also could be reduced, that work, if arts organisations and artists thought a little bit more about what English they use when they communicate with their artists. So often it's unpicking misunderstandings, it's the lack of clarity about deals, that we end up, even Arts Council emails from the access team, they're too long. They come to us and go, what? What are they asking me to do? Even the return email that says you've now got access support. They send us.
Sarah didn't write them.
And they go loading, but these, and I've emailed them, tried to talk to them,
Move on from art.
Let's move on. I will ditch that. Right, here we go. Best practice from an external organisation point of view. Bullet points. Okay. So, for example, I think the key thing here is back to relinquishing power that we talked about earlier. That seems to be a bit of a hallmark here. As Deaf Explorer, we're always approached, Rachel is approached to be a kind of an artistic interpreter performing alongside the artistic team in the hope that will then yield kind of like communication with the deaf audience. So what tends to happen is that, well, always, Rachel just suggested another way of doing it. So, for example, with the Hippodrome, it was like, let's get deaf people locally involved. Let's start having deaf people actually do the welcoming video as people enter the Van Gogh installation. And we've just sort of moved forward, and it's in its third iteration now. And Rubina Tariq in London is now running guided tours, and she's very well known in the deaf community, and people come. And, it's a real evidence, because it's been in how many iterations, that deaf audiences get to know about it in the community and are visiting. So it just shows that works. Another key one, which I won't spend that much time on, is Women in Theatre. They first came to us, same reason, we're doing deaf stories during lockdown. Okay, well, let's get morale in, let's get morale working locally at BID, let's get her just chatting to people, building up participants. So the project transforms from just the ambition of being accessible to deaf people to having deaf involvement, co-creation again. And then obviously when it's come back with the 1,000 threads, they have a very different perspective about what's achievable. Yeah, cool. And then,
I can see how many pages.
Yeah, I know. No, this is the last page. So, honestly.
We might post it.
Yeah.
Okay,
and then the best one is All Team Dance Theatre, whereby, we've got a relationship with Johnny, he already knows about what we're doing, but he still comes and goes, Rachel, can you just come to Victoria Square and do bits on interpretive while I introduce the games? And obviously, Sean more can be done here. So we invite Sean Noon, who's an ex-deaf wrestler, brilliant personality, a bit unfit now, but it's always been disappointed. But we got him going. But the thing was, it worked so well as a deaf co-presenter in Victoria Square. And obviously, he's got really big networks. People came to see him. Separate Access wrote a big review about it. It just people just visited over that week as a result of having Sean doing it. Because he's a personality, and that's the example of real easy things you can do.
How many people do you employ in your organisation?
Not enough. I mean, really, we have...
There's a number at this question, by the way. What's the number of people? So we want to really make a good... Yeah, it's quite important that when you look at what Deaf Explorer do, it's not about size all the time, because this came up with, I think, with the conversation we just in Sandy, and before we come on to the Hippodrome and Karen. Sorry, you are the Hippodrome now. Is that it's about people, it's not about the size of the, because this is a very easy thing that arts organisations say, is like, well, it's money, because the artists have got money or whatever, but it is about how you do things.
Yeah.
And so thank you, Alan. I'm going to actually move to Karen because I think Karen works more with individual artists and freelancers and a different sector, which we've not really heard about.
Yeah, so I'm going to take my CEDIA hat off, put my research fellow hat on. So I'm a research fellow in the School of Media here at Bergen City University, and for the past 5 years, 4 to 5 years now, I've been working with the Crafts Council on a series of projects, externally funded projects, looking at inequalities and diversity in the professional craft sector. So this is jewellers, ceramicists, textiles workers, you know, the people you see on like all the glitters and Great British, all of that type of craft. And it's been an interesting journey with the Crafts Council, and hearing you talk about the Royal Shakespeare Company. I was saying to you earlier, there's so many parallels with the Crafts Council and their journey as one of those upholders of elitism and whiteness in the craft sector, and coming to terms with that and having those difficult conversations. And Ed over there, who is also involved in the Craft UK, which is a national network of craftspeople. So it's great to see him here today because he's been part of those conversations as well. But in terms of what does inclusive leadership look like, I'm going to speak about what I've been doing more recently in working with socially engaged craft organisations. So this is, it's separated from what the Crafts Council do, which is professional. Usually the people they support, they've been through university, they come from a certain background, all of that. So what I'm doing in the current phase of my project is thinking about community crafts, socially engaged crafts, and what could the professional sector learn from them? Because during this journey I've been in contact with people like organisations such as Craftspace in Birmingham, and keeping an eye on what they do and conversations about what they do, and I'm putting together some case studies on that. So I'm going to give 2 examples in terms of leadership and inclusivity. One of them is in Edinburgh. So there is a jewellery studio up there called Silver Hub, and it's just run by 2 people. It's a social enterprise. They got funding during the pandemic to run a series of jewellery making workshops for women in the local area. So they're based in Leith, which is, and there's parts of that which are quite deprived. So they did outreach work to work with groups of women who have suffered trauma in their lives, and using jewellery as a way of therapy, sociability, mindfulness, and so on. And I was talking to them, the 2 people who run it, and they told me about how they identified the barriers to jewellery making for these women, which included just simple things like paying for the bus to get there, flexibility around childcare. Can they get someone to look after their kids? And having some sensitivity around the sort of issues that they've gone through. And it's worth noting that both of the women who run this, they're also trained in social development as well. So it was just those simple things like identifying those barriers and providing the women with the money so they could get to the jewellery studio, which they probably before would never have thought is a space for them. But they provided that means for them to get there, and if they had any issues, if they couldn't make a session, they were flexible and they worked around it. They did extra sessions. They provided baking kits so that the women could take the kits home and make their jewellery from home, which brings me on to Craftspace, who I think what I found interesting with Craftspace is how they have social justice at the core of everything they do. And I think that is the sort of main thing that I've taken away from them, is that every single decision, every every waking moment is, well, how is this inclusive? How do we make sure that we don't exclude anyone? What are the barriers? How do we remove those barriers from every group of people that we work with in Birmingham? And I think for me, those are just two examples, so I won't go on for much longer, but I think it's worth saying that both of these examples, they're run by people who are just extremely passionate about equality, diversity and inclusion, really dedicated to it, and it drives them. It's at the heart of everything they do, and I think the creative sector and leaders in the sector should adopt that similar ethos. I think that's the only way, like what you were saying, that change has been, we've been having these conversations for 20 years. There needs to be cultural and attitudinal changes. I think everyone needs to, I'm going to borrow something I heard in a Decolonising the Curriculum seminar, everyone needs to decolonise themselves. Everyone needs to keep questioning their own biases. Everyone, it doesn't matter how many EDI courses you've been on, how woke you think you are, you will have biases, you will have things that you need to ask yourself. And, you know, that's something I personally been trying to do as an academic in this institution, in a privileged position now, all of the time. So I'll leave it there. There might be more to say later.
Also, ask Karen afterwards about racist knitting. We won't get on to racist knitting, but racist knitting is a thing.
Yeah.
It's, you can Google it if you want to. Or go on Instagram and do a search on it. Chris?
Yeah, no worries. Thank you, and thanks, Karen. Most of what I say will probably pick up threads and themes of things that we've been hearing coming back from all of our speakers, all at different stages of our, longevity in this struggle for change, or in the spark and excitement of bringing change about. And I think what's really beautiful about today, Laura and Karen, is that breadth of experience that we're all bringing into this room, and the equality of the platform of people being able to share that, and us to find alliances but also reinforcements. And I think that's really exciting. It's going to be brief, so I'll shut up. What does it look like? Again, that preamble was linked to this really. Boldness and bravery is something that keeps coming back, and it's absolutely essential. And I will give a shout out to, Justine talked about, would she ever have envisaged being at the Royal Shakespeare Company? I would never have envisaged being at the Hippodrome. I was asked to come and join the movement that Helga, who would have been here today, and Fiona, our previous CEO and artistic director, were making at that organisation to make change. And she said, look, I haven't necessarily got a job for you, but will you come for a while and help me try and move this forward for who we're trying to be? And I was at a time, a bit like you were saying, Justine, where you thought about that for a moment, you looked in the eyes and thought, is that authentic? And you thought, yes, I will come and be part of that, because this feels like change could happen. And I think the beauty of large organisations, however long it takes to get there, there is the ability to affect things at scale. And I'll come back to that in a minute. But it was the boldness and bravery that Fiona showed to then support us all as a team, existing and new, trustees, and the wider community, to get the board with us, that even before the pandemic and all of the many intersecting crises that we faced, or not necessarily faced, but have become more visible. As we've said earlier, they're not new. A lot of these things are not new, but they're being spoken about and have been exposed. And before all of that, the board had got to a place where they committed to place inclusion at the heart of all we do, and that was written in the business plan that never made it to the board. John, who's our new chief exec, is going to build on that and has doubled down on that commitment, and the board has stayed true to that in the in-between times, but also for where we're going to go now. So what does it look like in practice? Well, it's about openness, it's about approachability, it's about joy, it's about making space, it's about letting people run with an idea and having room to grow it. It's about remaining responsive. It's about being permeable as an organisation. And some of those practical things around permeability are things that are really simple. Like, we have space available in our building. We will make that space available to artists to be able to say, we want to come and use your space. Can we do it? And we set up a scheme called Hippodrome Creatives. There's no fee, there's nothing else. It's just a way of us having a way of communicating with people and looking after people when they're there. People sign up for that, and then they get in touch with us by Wednesday of one week, and we go, yeah, these are all the available spaces for next week. What do you want? And so that's simple. People can do that. And that doesn't cost anything other than the asset you're already sitting on if the space is available. Equally, in that sense of responding to new ideas from new team members as we've grown things. Some of you will know our fantastic head of community and talent development, who is on maternity leave now, Sophia Griffin, and she grew through a number of organisations in this city and contributed to a number of organisations in this city. And one of the big changes she's made is the creation of Hippodrome Young Community, which again isn't mind-blowingly difficult. It's a young person's equivalent of the creative scheme that we're just talking about. It's about, once every, we tried it every month, it wasn't quite working, so in the school holidays, there's a day which is open space with a range of things that are artistic practice or wellbeing practice, but it's curated with and by young people. And it's just throwing open the doors and saying, come, you don't need to sign up and be a member of Youth Theatre, you don't need to make a long-term commitment, just come and be, and it's free. A little bit back to what you were saying earlier, Sandy, about spaces that in that instance are nothing to do with the commercial imperative. We will not then send them ticket offers. It's not about that. It's about people coming into the building and just being at home, and a recreation of civic space. So there's certain real simple things. And there's a bit of a kind of open secret with people who know me, that how do I connect with people? Quite often it's through Twitter. So when I first came to Birmingham, I came and joined the old rep to reopen that building and to look at how that could become a more permeable space for young people in the city. And everywhere I've been, like many other people, there have been young leaders schemes or young producer schemes, and that's part of what I've always done. So as I came, I knew it was something that felt like it was necessary, or that I would normally approach things. But I thought, well, there's no point me doing it if it already exists. So I just had a look, and through that, the first couple of people I met in Birmingham were Anissa at Beat Freaks and Amara at Maya. Both incredible women leaders, young, diverse women leaders in this city who've made change in their own different ways and built things around them. And from that, Southside Producers was born, which again wasn't old rep producers very consciously, because if it's just old rep producers, then it's closed. If it's Southside and that area around it, and some of the benefit for that goes to Arts Connect, because they said, we're not interested in one thing, we want it to be a partnership. And so we built things around that with the business district. First connection with the Hippodrome, with festivals, with local hotels, with our theatre, and just going, come in, help make change, make the projects you want to make, and use us as a base. Through that, various leaders have been part of that, who've gone on to other things. Back to what does it look like as diverse and inclusive leadership? Openness to, but commitment to, dogged commitment to, and never letting it go, and keeping it moving forward however many years it takes, to embrace difference and the new thinking and the challenges that that brings. To make space within your week and people's role descriptions and within the structure of your organisation for people to grow and progress. And that might mean choosing not to appoint a head of a particular department because you've appointed a manager and you want to give them the chance to grow, rather than stifling that next step. Even if in the short term, that puts a little more work on yourself or on someone else to make that, have that opportunity to come through. Partnerships we've talked about, nothing gets delivered really well, I believe, without some form of partnership, certainly in terms of something that has meaningful relevance or impact or change, because one set of views will never bring about change. So that, I won't go any further. We can go further in that one another time. But I'm going to leap from those kind of specifics to that question about scale. I'd had the pleasure, when I was at the old rep, of working with Noel under the old Creative Employment Programme scheme of apprenticeship support. And we got a certain way, and we got a certain way to the scale that that organisation could do it, and I'm really proud of what happened there. Some of the people we work with as apprentices there are now full-time employees at the Hippodrome, which is great. They've come through that journey, and they are business service managers at the Hippodrome. They're not a casual front of house worker. So there's people who've come through that route. We know that 2020 to 2022, in the wake of the killing of George Floyd and the opening that gave, finally, for more raw and honest communication, from that, many changes have triggered and accelerated. I was honoured to be invited, and I choose that word really wisely, to be invited to be part of the working group for More Than a Moment, which was initiated and led by Elizabeth Lowell, who, if you've not met her, is an incredible person of this region. And she brought an alliance of people around her who were committed to change, be they black creatives or be they organisations who needed to change but had shown some willingness to do so. And together a pledge was authored that lots of people, lots of organisations have signed up to, 90, and 60 of those, and I asked her this when she told me that things had improved a bit on the statistics. I said, but have the same number of people responded? Yes, they have. So 60 of the 90 organisations that signed up to that pledge have reported their progress against agreed collective change in 2021 and now in 2022. And we're starting to see some shifts. So that's one thing about scale. Back to the apprenticeship thing. One of our responses at the Hippodrome was, well, what can we do at scale? Well, actually, an organisation of our scale can offer apprenticeships at national living wage. Not everyone can, but we could and we should, and we did. And there's a cohort of 6 people, 2 of the 8, it wasn't for them. And that will always be the case. I'm sure Noel would echo that and others would echo that. But 6 people across 4 departments are really progressing well in our organisation. One who started slightly earlier, she's now in full-time employment. And similarly to Shek's story, she didn't even know that role existed before she started that. And we've now made space for her to lead projects, which hopefully will then leave space to making room for her then to progress. The board, someone asked about boards earlier. What the More Than a Moment pledge gave us was a framework to really discuss with our board at every step. This is the scale of change we need to consider. This is the whole remit of changes we need to consider. That was a really focused piece of work, and rightly so, around change and equity for black creatives. But that was a starting point, and always was, that with that we start to make advancements for everybody. It was right that it was focused. We will continue to have that focus, and we will expand that focus out more to recognise more intersection, to recognise more characteristics. It relates to recruitment, it relates to programme, it relates to succession, it relates to the culture that you create within a workforce, the safe spaces you enable so that employees can make those spaces, hold those spaces on the terms they want to have them, and the conversations. Last thing, grab the moment. Don't wait for it to be right, try. You will get it wrong, but grab it and try. And then embed that learning, take people with you into policy.
Just very quickly, also, you're a safety artist.
I could go on.
Yeah.
So within partnerships, like Richard, and also like the partnership that we built through Bangor, which again we'll happily talk about later, and also our artists like Akash Adedra, who was born here in Birmingham, lives in Leicester, supporting ambition. So finally, his work Samsara will hit our stage in about 10 days' time.
Go and see it.
Yes, go and see it. And actually, yeah, Lucy's the board member. But Sonia Sabri, Motion House, all of these companies work in different ways to affect specific change. And also recently, we've been building national partnerships with companies like Talawa, with Tamasha, with New Earth, companies who we've known for years, to say, okay, well, how can we partner with them to create opportunities and pathways for artists here to expand their opportunities? Whether or not they want to leave the region, stay in the region, whatever we want to do, how do we do that together? And so it's through associates, it's through partners, it's through specific projects for specific change, and then bigger projects for a broader cohort of change.
So the answer to that question was, if you look on the Hippodrome's website, it has the most diverse group of associate artists at any other kind of cultural, I can say, you might not want to say that, but I've only the cultural organisation in this region. So the point was, it's about you invest in diverse artists. That's how you get diverse audiences. That was the answer, by the way.
Cool.
Thank you
It's
so
all
much.
right. You know, like, you just don't tell me which bit of the story to tell today.
Well,
though.
see,
It's all
I work in the city, and there's a reason why I ask certain people to be on panels because of what they do. I think it's really the thing that I think that nobody can say themselves is it's very authentic, and there's integrity in everything that you do, or all of you. So that's what I need to be really proud of. Regina, you had a question. Hi, Edith.
From organisations that have budgets. How are you checking yourselves that you're not want to see happen onto partners? And so that, you know, they're frontlining for an organisation and they're going to be taking responsibility. Perhaps it's a, you know, a great opportunity for them because they may be starting out. So how are you not milking it?
Yeah, how you making sure that you're not asking people to service your own agenda for what you think the outcome should be? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really important that it's transparent and honest. It's a conversation, and it's about going in and talking about ambitions and making space for people to set the ambitions, and then to use the skills you have to support the ambitions that those companies wish to achieve. Not saying you need to do this project we've had a great idea for. It's about co-creation. With the Van Gogh project, we were really fortunate that at the same time the 7 inclusive principles dropped just before that, and so we went, well, we're going to grab that and we're going to work by that as the way that we design the programme. And so we worked with Rachel, we worked with Morale, and then Morale ended up being the learning artist on the programme. That was an open brief that she pitched for separately. And it's about being responsive. It's about making room for the agenda to be set by the people you're working with, not dictating the outcome is where I'd say it's a start. It's probably one bit of 50, but, you know.
But I think it's disrupting the hierarchy. The way that Sandeep and Justine talked about it, that model is completely not going to work anymore.
I just want to mention attention around the time it takes to slow down and give time to co-creation for making things more inclusive and accessible, with the rush to be back online or live in spaces with insufficient timelines and budgets, and the pressure that creates and the impact that has on well-being. It's almost like we're harm. This is like self-harm in our workplaces, right? So how are we going to get better at adopting, embracing new ways of working? Because we've got a whole generation coming through with, you know, massive mental health crisis. They want boundaries in the workplace. And we're a sector that doesn't really traditionally not done boundaries because it's so passionate. We work all hours. It's not sustainable. It really is. So I'm just wondering whether there's any practices around that.
Yeah. I mean, I think Deaf Explorer has this challenge of our team wanting to deliver artistic work to the highest quality while simultaneously delivering the best access. So that does exactly what you're communicating. It does create harm. It does have impact. So I think in terms of our future planning, we don't want to be working like that. We don't want to work like we've worked in the last 6 to 8 months. You know, since August with Richard, you know, last year. You know, we haven't stopped. You know. So I think there are very real impacts on it, and in terms of mental health. So I'm really mindful, I suppose, as a leader who has that role in our organisation, which is kind of pretty level management, really. But I am backing seniors leaders that would do that to build a structure for that. But we need to sort of adhere to that, you know, and bring in extra people to do stuff that is around talking therapies really. I mean, we did it on a project recently with Rinku's, and it was fantastic, you know, and everybody wanted more. So we are building it into all the projects we do, and that's for the producers as well as the performers. So all I'm trying to say is that I am very aware of it, but I think the pressure is true because those things are both are difficult to achieve. And I think, you know, it's like every, you know, I was told yesterday about our artist Billy Reed, you know, he's a deaf dancer being in Blue Peter, he's fantastic. He's really worried about taking risks with his creative practice because he just thinks he has to be the best he can at all times. You know, and that's, you know, that doesn't give him any much freedom, you know, to explore different things. And I think Deaf Explorer gets stuff like that. We're kind of like, you know, we want to just have some more time to just actually do things, what's the word? Safely.
Yeah.
And I guess just to echo, I did say, but there's alongside the inclusion and anti-racism working group, and which has now branched into a subcommittee of the board and staff working groups. There's a greater range of people involved in that with a greater degree of, there's kind of like two tracks. There's been the push forward quickly, and then there's the build more sustainably and slowly. And there's now a wider range of people involved in the conversation, not just in terms of demographics, but in terms of levels within the organisation. But sitting alongside that, and with the work intersecting with it, is also the wellbeing working group. So that actually inclusion, we can't be inclusive unless we're considering people's well-being. So to speak back to that, and Ruth, new colleague over there, from a few months ago, is our Director of People and Culture, who was appointed 6 months ago as a very conscious appointment to help ensure we create and sustain a workforce that enables people to grow rather than burn out, and to be supported and to be nurtured and to have time. But we're really conscious that things go together and not just in a really, do you have anything, we will meet it kind of way.
I think that's the practice we all need to can be really generous in sharing.
Yeah.
But I'd love to hear more about that role and how that will manifest and what we can share with other organisations who don't have the luxury or the privilege of Director of People and Culture roles, because I think we're all kind of in this together, and people absolutely make it work, but people are struggling to make it work.
But I'm a freelancer. Helga's a freelancer. No one runs a business, and we do this. So I'm always of the kind of opinion, if I can do it as a freelancer, and it's about doing it differently. It's absolutely about doing it differently. It's doing it in collaboration. We couldn't have done this if it wasn't in a partnership with BCU and Noel, Helga and myself. But it's also about working differently with different people. I don't know, there's something about the art sector that all through lockdown, everyone talked about, you know, there were dolphins and canals and the birds were in the sky and all this kind of nonsense. Venice particularly was my favourite one, because as soon as Venice Biennale opened this year, my social media was full of people flying to Venice for 2 days. I went, what about the dolphins? You know, where are the dolphins gone? But actually, I'm not very good at slowing down. That's sort of, you know, I'm not relaxed. I get very anxious. I had COVID I had a 3-day COVID, and I was so bored of I don't do anything. But I do work collaboratively, which is such a better way of doing things. But I also work with different people who bring different perspectives. And I think what the Arts Organization have done, we went through 2.5 years of a lockdown. And what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. What's happened? People are burnt out. There's still audiences who haven't come back. 34% of audiences haven't come back. But it turns out loads of diverse people engage with culture. Who knew? Who knew that during lockdown we were all engaging in loads of different ways? So when I came to the RSC to see Much Ado About Nothing, completely 100% black cast. Shakespeare did not turn over in his grave, and Stratford upon Avon did. The Ravens did not leave the tower at black cast, which for years people have said wouldn't happen. Colour Purple at the Hippodrome, massively, an audience that absolutely looked like Birmingham. So worked differently, programmed differently, took risks, but it wasn't even a risk because diverse audiences come to things. Yeah. So maybe we could just do things slightly differently instead of perpetuating the same old track that creatively is really dull as well. You know, and Mac, if you go to anything at the Mac, when I went to the Adela Suleiman opening, a huge South Asian audience, which apparently don't go to anything. I mean, I get asked all the time. Well, apparently, somebody who's not in this room said to me, well, they talk about South Asian community and the arts, and I said, well, not you, because you don't count. Well, they're not here, obviously. They should. But you know, and apparently all South Asian people don't have the same experience, the same way that all deaf people don't have the same experience. So this is a revolutionary thing for some people. So I do get your point, Monica. 20 years later, you're going, really? But I think there is something about doing things differently. So, Laura. Here's somebody just something very differently as well.
My question is like around the examples of big organizations and small organizations being actively being inclusive, like what you're doing in the Igbo program. However, I'm wondering how ready is the sector to actually take on power sharing at the highest level, because at the moment I really appreciate what's happening, but in my head, visually, I feel like there's this hierarchy of like non-diverse, like they're there at the top, and they are now taking on these diverse people, and yes, things are moving and positively inside the organization, but I'm wondering, are they ready to actually share power from the highest level so we see diversity for what it is? Because it's there, it's changing, but I don't fully appreciate the change yet, because I'm really passionately wanting to see it from the top, considering how long it's being talked about. So it's like, oh yeah, we're getting there. Oh yes, oh it's really happening now. Or it's, but what's happening there at the top?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Laura.
I think some of that starts with the boards, because if the boards are making the senior appointments, then the boards themselves need to be more diverse. If that is going to be something that's going to shift and just be natural and not be a forced way of thinking, right? Because we know that that has been the case for some people. That's been a forced way of thinking. I know I need to do that, and they get it here, but they don't get it here. And so that's started to happen. So Justine talked about it. It started to happen with ourselves, but it has to be a conscious commitment. So one of the things, we talked about policy and recruitment. Like as was called for within the More Than a Moment change, and sorry to keep banging on about it, but it's given a framework for us all to have a conversation and try to move together, move something on. One of the things in there was calling for organisations to adopt the breathing rule in terms of recruitment. So committing, there's different interpretations of it, depending how strong we go on it, but committing that certainly if someone meets the criteria, the minimum criteria, and are from, in that sense, the black creative workforce, but from a global majority background, to commit to give that person an interview in the way that you might in terms of disability by law. There is also, depending on where things are, and this is where the problem... Yeah, so really... Yeah. So if someone meets, so in terms of equality and discrimination, in terms of disability... No, I'm not saying that. No.
You might want to look at the board at the moment. It's a thing in Birmingham.
What I'm saying is that the organisations, like, so brilliant. So if a disabled person applies for a role and they meet the criteria that have to be met, like the minimum criteria that have to be met, the essential criteria, then they will be offered an interview. That is a legal thing. This is saying we will also do that to change the representation of our workforce. One of the commitments is going, we will make sure that that commitment is also extended to ethnic diversity, be that Black creative workforce, be that South Asian background, be that whatever, we will make that commitment. And that's something that we signed up to and went through with the board. I believe that, you know, there's a long, long way to go. That's one thing that can help to affect change, but it's actually got to be a choice and a commitment to live that out. And it shouldn't be a choice, but people have to embrace that and progress with it and make those decisions. And that's how change will happen, or one of the ways change will happen at the top of the board, to embrace that.
I'm going to finish with, okay, one action that anyone can do, actually, organisations can do to make organisations more inclusive. Let's start with Alan. One.
On a similar note, really, just role models, just role model visibility and role models in the organisation.
Karen.
It's hard to pick one. Make space for those really difficult conversations that people don't want to have. They have to take place for everything to change.
Offer advance information calls, online calls for people for all roles, to people to find out more about what they are thinking about stepping into, to demystify the position itself, the process that people will go through, and ideally the panel. And there's some instances where we have had the panel that people will meet at their interview as the people who are on that first call, and within that making sure that that panel represents the diversity of the communities that you serve. And so actually there is something that's a practical step that can just demystify it, take a barrier away before anyone even has to apply.
Thank you very much. You're looking blank here now. We're wrapping up. We're wrapping up. Oh, okay. Yeah, we're done now. We're finishing now. Oh, cool. Okay.
I don't get to say anything.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We really appreciate everyone staying and coming from all across the country. The launch, the stage is actually having another launch.
In-person launch.
In-person launch with food and drink, I think, in the next room.
Yes, it's in the next room. There's drinks and nibbles, and it's me and a couple of the advisory board members of CEDIA, including so I'll say a little bit about CEDIA so you can find out a bit more about it and just network and talk about the things of today. Thank you all for coming. Huge thanks to Lara for putting this together, and to Noel and to Helga. Hi Helga.
We want to say hi to Helga on the
thanks to our presenters, the BCU events team,
Claire, that is amazing.
Claire Butlin, the caterers, security staff, everyone who's been involved here, and the cleaners, for making this event what it is. So let's go next door.
Yeah, I'm going to have the last word because I have to have the last word. And my takeaway is just do it. I would be swearing if we weren't live streaming this, so just do it. Stop talking about it and do it. It strikes me after 20 years, and my father before me was a commission for racial equality, that it isn't that difficult, and you just do it, and it's about people, and you can change the culture and give away the power. So, there you go. Got the last word.